Hi there. Today I'm going to talk about First Into Action, a dramatic personal account of life in the SBS by Duncan Falconer. And this was written during a time when there was intense interest in the SAS due to the number of books that were coming out written by former members in the wake of the massive success of Bravo 20. And Duncan Falconer, who served in the SBS, decided to kind of show the other side of the story in UK Special Forces and give an inside look into the Special Boat Service. And really, it was the first to do so. There'd been books written by historians, but never by somebody who had served in the unit, as far as I know. So Duncan Falconer, as a young man, was keen on judo, and he joins the Royal Marines and goes through the commando course at Lympstone. He describes it in detail. It's one of the hardest military courses in the world, without a doubt. You know, things like the 30-miler and things like that. One of the DS on the course, a corporal he calls Jakers, was a particularly hard taskmaster and really put the guys through it. And but he passes and wins his Green Beret. So you are then assigned to a unit, and they always have to fill the admin posts. Nobody wants to be a clerk, and they're trying to persuade him to be a clerk, and he says, just out the blue, I want to join the SBS. Well, at the time, there was a requirement that you had to have a minimum of 3 years service in a commando before you could even be considered for the SBS. So he's told to go away and think about it, and just by chance, it comes out that the SBS is facing a manpower shortage due to a lot of the guys being lured away to work on the North Sea, on diving jobs there, which were really, really well paid. So they needed guys, and they dropped the requirements for 3 years prior service, and you could go in straight after completing the commando course. So Duncan Falconer and a couple of his mates sign up. Off they go to Poole. And they're all assembled and in the accommodation, and lo and behold, one of the guys on the course is Jakers, and he's sort of, what are you guys doing here, etc., etc. And he's not at all happy that these sprogs are going to have a chance to join the elite unit that he has fought so hard to try to get into. Anyway, SAS selection's being fairly well described. SBS selection obviously is orientated to the maritime role and to the swimmer canoeist role, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff thrown in as tests. And one of the things in the book is they're doing a march over the hills, and they have to carry their canoes with them broken down. They weigh 110 pounds, plus the fully laden bergen, plus weapons, plus belt kit, plus water, etc. So off they go, and go, and go. And it turns out to be a 21 mile march. What it was, the DS had to lose so many guys. There was too many guys on the course, and they were using it as a sickener to get rid of some of the guys, and guys weren't dropping off. So they kept going until some had left, and it was a total of 21 miles. So they do survival training, they do long canoe movements up in Scotland, attacking various targets, two-man canoes that they use, and Jakers actually chooses Duncan to be his partner on one of these exercises. So, you know, he had made a breakthrough. Then so the rumour goes through that, yeah, okay, you'll pass selection, but they'll never ever put you into the unit. But lo and behold, he does. And then some of the things he describes, one of the first things he does, he's sent to Northern Ireland to work alongside the SAS squadron that was over there at the time. This was in the early days, the mid-70s. And throughout the book, really, what he does is to kind of demystify Special Forces, to show the mistakes that were made, both by SAS and SPS, and also the lighter side of stuff, some quite funny things that happened. You could look at it as having a dig at the SAS. Unit rivalry does exist, and I'll talk about that a bit later. But nevertheless, it's interesting. So another thing he describes, which is fascinating, is the submarine operations, where they, while the submarine is submerged, they have to, it's called exit and re-entry procedures. They come out of the escape hatch, make the way along the casing, and then retrieve stores that have been lashed to various compartments in the submarine hull, and then make an ascent and then a swim to the target. On some of the submarines, they have a 5-man chamber, so 5 guys, full equipment, have to cram in this, which is then flooded, it's sealed and then open, and they exit into the casing. And he talks about an exercise up in Scotland where they lost 2 men. The guys were on the casing when there was a loss of salinity because freshwater streams flow into the Scottish lochs, and the submarine hit a patch of fresh water and took what's called a depth excursion. It suddenly dropped because fresh water has less buoyancy. So the 2 men were killed during that, an officer and one of the guys. Then another thing that Duncan Falconer talks about is the 14th Int, the undercover unit in Northern Ireland. He's tapped on the shoulder by the company sergeant major and given the option of trying it out. And it's all very, very, he's told not to tell anyone that he's going there, and anyone there who asks who he is told to mind their own business and keep an eye on them. It was very, very secret, and rightly so, because they were going right up against the terrorists. He describes a little bit about the selection for 14th Int, or the Det as it was called, and one of the guys who was one of the DS on his course was one of the SAS guys he'd worked with in Northern Ireland and recognised him, and that, sort of realised, well, we're not going to break this guy. He's already been through the mill. Later on, they brought in that SAS and SPS didn't have to do the initial selection for the Det. They missed out the first couple of weeks and just did Camp 2, etc. And while in Northern Ireland, there were some really hairy incidents, including one in Dungannon where one of their guys was shot. He was sitting in the car, he was ambushed, and he was shot very, very severely, and one of the other operators drives him to the hospital, and his life saved, but he had to leave the military as a result of that. Then towards the end of the book, there's a big section again on the maritime role, and he describes a full operation in the North Sea, taking down or recovering one of the oil platforms. So the approach is by submarine, and some distance from the target, the guys do the exit procedure through the chamber, make the way along the casing to what's called the lurking area, where a section of the decking has been removed and they wedge themselves in, holding on to various pipes and protuberances, and they're breathing off umbilicals, which are down there, parts of this submarine equipment. And then the sub makes a run to the target. So at depth, they're moving. Then they come to the surface and then have to orientate on the target and do a swim, and then a very, very arduous climb up the legs of the platform. They use various technical means to do this, but it certainly is mainly muscle power. And then when they're ready to go into action, close quarter action, boats and helicopters are coordinated in, and there's a strike from above, from on the deck, and from the boats. Because the North Sea oil was such a strategic economic target. So that was really interesting, and it does really illustrate the specialised nature of maritime counter-terrorism. Oh, by the way, he also mentions the Falklands. His unit wasn't involved, but other parts of the SBS went out there, did various things. They weren't used probably as much as they would have liked, but one of the things they did do was the first ever ship assault from the helicopters. They took the Argentinian ship, the Narwhal, and so that was a first. Okay, so I mentioned the rivalry, and over the years on close protection and training jobs, I did work with several SBS guys. I also shot with some of them. I also worked for a company run by a guy who's former commanding officer of the SBS, who's featured in this book. And okay, sometimes there was a little bit of banter, I suppose, but on jobs where there was SAS and SBS working together, I never saw any, so, and I think nowadays with Afghanistan and Iraq, it's largely gone, because back then they were all competing for whatever jobs were on offer. With the Great War on Terror, there was more than enough to go around. So also they now operate together in the Directorate of Special Forces. They both do a common selection, but then the SBS guys go off and do the more specialised selection process for the maritime component. One of our guys, some of you who trained with us may remember him, Danny. He joined the Marines. He still holds records for the commando course, and he went into SPS. And certainly he was a very fit guy, and was the kind of material they were looking for. So as I don't think the rivalry is quite as much as it was. Duncan Falconer has written quite a few thrillers, one of which was filmed as the movie Stratton. And I've read a couple of them, and one of them is based around the debt work, and they're pretty good. But First Into Action, first book of its kind really, and was a really good insight.